Okay, here I am drinking my tea, really excited to talk about how World War I started. I think that there's too few people in this world that actually know what the heck caused World War I. Like, even historians sometimes struggle to explain this to the common folk. So, hopefully, at the end of this video, even if you need to replay it like a million times, you can tell someone and look really smart exactly what caused World War I. So that's what this video is going to be about. What caused it, how most of Europe ends up becoming involved in a world war, where the early fighting takes place, and what the results were. So I'll try to keep this as short as possible, but I do love talking about this topic. So it's complicated, but just to give you a preview, most people use the acronym MAIN to remember the cause of World War One. And this is an oversimplification, which we're going to get into the more complicated version of this, but basically it stands for militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. Militarism is when you emphasize the army, and what was happening in Europe is that people were like building up their military without there actually being a war. And they were also inventing all these new weapons, but there was no war to fight. And they're going to end up fighting a war because they want to use their new weapons and show them off. Alliances. So there was actually not even a war happening yet, but countries start forming like secret alliances. It's like it caused a fight because people were suspicious and nervous, like, hey, why are those guys making an alliance? Like, what are they allying against? Are they against us? Maybe we need to be in an alliance just in case. Imperialism. So we already know that at the time, Western countries were competing to take over and influence like weaker countries and smaller countries, especially in Africa and Asia and a little bit in South America. And then nationalism. And honestly, you guys, we still see a lot of nationalism in the world today, maybe especially in the United States. But it's the belief that a specific nation, language, or culture is superior to all others. So it causes competition. All right. So, first of all, nationalism. It begins to sweep through Europe in the 1800s. It goes along with imperialism. So, as countries wanted to take over other countries, they had this attitude like, well, we should because we're better. It leads German states to join together in 1871 to form something known as the German Empire. They tended to divide the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which included people of many nationalities and language groups, and they kind of so nationalism was a problem for the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Serbia was an independent, like it's called a Slavic nation, wanting only people who were Slavics in Austria-Hungary to break away and form a Slavic empire. We're going to get more into that. Russia thought that Serbia should break away from Austria-Hungary because Serbia had been taken over by Austria-Hungary. And then Austria-Hungary thought that, like, because they were ruling over Serbia, that this nationalism is a problem. Again, we're going to get more into that, and I think that's going to become more clear. But just people thinking they're better than everybody else because of their particular people group, their particular language. Okay, so another one is imperialism. Even the United States was in on this. Like, we were trying to build up our empire, even though we are a lot more sneaky about it. Imperialism increased the tensions between European powers as they built their empires. Militarism, which I already told you that that's that idea of building up large militaries and preparing for war. People were doing that in Europe. Like, they were building up these big militaries, but there was like no reason to do it. There was no war, but all of a sudden they just started building a big army because they thought, that's what makes a strong country. But as one country builds like a strong, big army, it makes the other countries nervous and they feel like they need to build up a stronger army. So as Europeans started building up these armies and getting armed, they all got nervous, right? So they start being like, okay, well, like all these other countries around me are like building up this big army, so maybe I need some allies. just in case, like, we go to war, so we can keep a balance of power. We don't want like one country with all these allies and then they're going to gang up on us and like take over us or something. So two sides sort of form, just again, not necessarily out of any other reason than they're nervous that something might happen. So one side is called the Triple Alliance, and that's going to be made up of Austria-Hungary, Germany, and Italy. And then the other side is going to be called the Triple Entente, which is Britain, France, and Russia. Just to give you a heads up, it gets a little confusing because when the war actually starts and these sides are still really similar, their names kind of flip-flop. So the Triple Alliance becomes the Central Powers because they're in the middle of Europe, and then the Triple Entente becomes the Allies. So just so you have the heads up that gets a little confusing. So the existence of these competing alliances creates an unsteady balance of power in Europe. So there's like sides drawn, but there's no fights. Okay, so this is going to make it like it's like building a fire, but all we have to do is light a match and start it. Okay, so I'm going to give you an overview and then I'm going to get into it. Okay, so the relationship between Austria-Hungary and Serbia got worse. Okay, so once again, to clarify, I think I've got a map here to show you. Okay, so this is Austria-Hungary, and they had built like an empire. You see all this land here. They had taken over a place that used to be called Bosnia. Okay, Bosnia, there's a Bosnians, which is a people group, but there's also Bosnia, which was a country. And there's Serbia, which is a country, but there's also Serbians, which is a people group. Okay, and they speak a language called Slavic. They call it a Slavic language. It's kind of like Algonquin, which is just like a language group. It's got a lot of similarities, okay? But anything like you see that, okay, wait, I'm getting myself distracted. So anyway, okay, Austria-Hungary had taken over Bosnia. Serbia was angry about it because Serbia, there was a lot of ethnic Serbians living in that area that used to be known as Bosnia. And there's like something called a Serbian nationalist movement where Serbians started being like, hey, we're the best people in the world. And we're better than Austria-Hungary, right? So they start getting mad that Austria-Hungary was controlling an area with so many Serbians in it. And they start to think like, hey, no, this area right here that used to be Bosnia, because there's all these Serbians living in it, it should either be independent or belong to us, also known as Serbia. Okay. So Franz Ferdinand is going to be the crown prince of Austria-Hungary. Okay, a crown prince means like if the king dies, he would become king. So he was the heir to the throne if anything ever happened to the king. So he goes on a visit to Sarajevo, which is the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Okay, so once again, here's Sarajevo, used to be part of Bosnia, the country that was taken over by Austria-Hungary. And it's normal. He's just visiting part of his empire, right? So he goes to visit, okay, and there's a guy named, here he is, Gabriel Princip. Okay, and here's Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife. I should know her name, but I can't think of her name right now. And here they are. They're getting into their car. This is in Bosnia. They're going to visit their territory. So this guy, his name is Gabriel Princip. He was a member of a Serbian nationalist organization. Once again, there was a bunch of Serbians living in Bosnia. Okay, and he was angry that Franz Ferdinand was visiting because he thought that Serbians like him were better than everybody else. And so he thought that Serbia should either be, or that Bosnia, with all of its Serbians, okay, should either be part of Serbia or independent. Okay, so he's angry. He's a member of that Black Hand, I don't know if I said that, which is that Serbian nationalist group, and he assassinates Franz Ferdinand and his wife on June 28th of 1914. Okay, so he kills them. These people, he shoots them. I think he shoots them while they're riding in their car. This is obviously going to make Austria-Hungary very angry, okay? But remember that there was all of these alliances that were already formed. So the group was called the Triple Alliance, okay? So that was Austria-Hungary, Germany, and Italy, and they had promised each other that they were going to be allies just in case anything ever happened. They would have each other's back, okay? So, um, so basically what happens is Germany wants to go to war because Germany has like they've built up all these new weapons, like basically invented a bunch of weapons. There was like a nationalist movement, they had a strong army, and they wanted to go to war because they wanted to have an opportunity to get more land and to show off how great they were becoming. So they convinced Austria-Hungary to give Serbia, because that Gabriel Princip was from Serbia, to give them this like list of demands to prevent war. So it's called an ultimatum. So it was such a ridiculous, so many ridiculous demands that Germany knew that Serbia would never do it. Okay. So because they wanted an excuse to start a war. So the problem is that Russia had already told Serbia they would have its back in case anything ever happened. Again, another alliance. And that's because there was a lot of Serbians living in Russia, and there was a lot of Russians living in Serbia. Okay, once again, nationalism. So Russia also believed that either Serbia and Bosnia should be independent or it should belong to them. Or I think they would have supported the idea of Bosnia being part of Serbia. But the point is that it was because of who lived there that made it so complicated, okay? So when all of these lists of demands are not met, okay, we've got a little list of steps to war. So Austria sends an ultimatum to Serbia, and then about a month later, Austria declares war on Serbia. So once this happens, Russia is the one that responds because it's kind of like a big brother. Like it said, it's going to have the back of Serbia. Okay, so Russia gets ready to go to war. Germany sends an ultimatum to Russia and orders Russia to stop mobilizing for getting ready to war. So now we're kind of crossing over. So it's so Russia sends an ultimatum to Austria-Hungary after Austria-Hungary sends an ultimatum to Serbia, and then Germany sends an ultimatum to Russia to back down. And then, okay, so are you still with me? This is complicated, like I said. France, a new player in the story because France is going to be an ally of Russia. France gets ready to declare war against Germany. They mobilize, they get ready to go to war. So complicated. Then Germany declares war on France. Okay, so Germany is going to declare war on France, which is way up here because now they're mad that they're threatening them. And then tries to, I wonder if I have, yep. And then, so this is a better picture. So Germany declares war on France, okay, and decides to invade France through Belgium. So quickly attacks France through Belgium. And this is going to open up the Western fronts, okay? And then this is going to cause the beginning of World War I because once they attack France, France was already allies with Great Britain. So Great Britain had already been promised to have France's back, and then they all go to war. Here's a little caveat. Italy gets mad because they think that Germany started trying to start a war, so they actually switch sides, which is a good call because they lost otherwise. Okay, so that was complicated, but that's the why. Okay, so Europe goes to war. And here are the sides. We've got the Central Powers, which are Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, Germany. Okay, and then versus, oh, and the Ottoman Empire, I forgot about them. Versus, so the Ottoman Empire, let me just show you, is right down here. So anything in yellow, those are all the Central Powers. Okay, the green are the Allied powers. Okay, so that's going to be Britain, France, Russia, and then Italy, because Italy gets mad that Germany is trying to start a war and switches sides. So the early days of the war. First of all, I think everybody in Europe believed that the war would end quickly. So the German Kaiser, his name was Kaiser Wilhelm. Kaiser is another name for king. He actually really believed that the war would end quickly because he thought that Germany was very strong. They had invented U-boats, so those are like submarines. So he thought that that would be like their secret weapon. They had poison gas. They had all kinds of stuff. So he thought that they were going to win. He also came up with a plan. It's called the Schifflin Plan. I don't know if I said that right, but the plan was to strike France by sending troops through Belgium, which, remember, I told you that's how the war started. But he thought if he did that quickly enough, so right here, if he did that quickly enough that he could invade France so fast and take over Paris. Back in the day, that's how you win a war. You just take over the capital because the capital would be like where the government is. And so you just take over the government and you win. But the problem is that that plan failed. They were not able to get Paris right away. So the very first battle was called the First Battle of the Marne. So like that was the first major battle. The French troops forced the Germans to retreat just 25 miles from Paris, the French capital. If they would have won, that would have stopped the war. So this is the Western Front, which is the battle line between the French and German troops that reaches from Switzerland to the North Sea. So here it is, Switzerland to the North Sea. You can see the red line. That's the Western Front. And that's going to kind of move as they fight. It's, whoever is winning, it will kind of push away from them and they'll extend into other territories. You can see, I think this map was from 1916, that Germany actually had made some significant advances into France, but eventually it's going to kind of deadlock before the United States comes into the battle. The Eastern Front is going to be between Russia and the Central Powers, and that is right here. And you can see it goes from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. And actually, Russia lost a lot of territory at first because they really were not as advanced and prepared as everybody else. Their advantage is that they just had a lot of people living in Russia, and they also have like some major mountain ranges in here too. So that makes it really difficult to invade Russia. By September 14th, most people realized that the war was not going to end quickly. So again, every country that entered thought, hey, this is not going to be any problem. We'll be done with this fast. We'll be home for Christmas. And it did not happen that way. And don't forget, the United States is still neutral. They stay neutral until 1917 is when they finally get involved. So that's like a long time. It ends up being kind of a long war.